To start with this topic, I would like to say that in the world history, people have been doing uh, various things for the national cause, and maintaining international relations has been an important part of from the strategy point of view. And therefore, when we are a part of the global economy or global community, maintaining the international relations is a very very common thing. But what are the different aspects related to that one must understand? Again, if you look at the scenario today, you will find that though countries are sovereign and nation states have complete control and decision making power in order to decide how your economy will function, how the political system will work, but still there are lot of factors which are affecting and therefore somewhere dominating the national cause, also the sovereignty that the countries are otherwise able to enjoy. So in that sense, how do we relate the current situation with the concept of sovereignty and how it is affecting the international relations at large? So this is something that I would like to talk about. And in the beginning itself, let me tell you that this is a very very important factor and important issue with respect to the world politics, and also how the structure, the global structure is changing over the time. So it's a very very vibrant topic. Now, with respect to the aspect of state sovereignty, in the previous class we talked about the responsibility and accountability of the state, but that topic was more related to the domestic functions that the state is supposed to perform in the most responsible and accountable manner. But when it comes to the international context, states enjoy sovereignty, and they are sovereign not just to determine the policies at domestic level, but they also have the decision making power to decide how they are going to function for the and how they are going to represent themselves at international level, how they determine policies with respect to international aspects like international relations, exchange rate management, trade policy, etc., which means a nation state is free to decide how they will function for the international community. Now, this is called as sovereignty. When you are independent enough to decide on your own, that is sovereignty. And with respect to this, the literature in political science, it talks about a very important concept that is called as the treaties of Westphalia. I hope this is visible on my screen, that the origin of international relations or international ethics as such, it lies in the literature that has evolved over the time. So the concept of international relations, and don't just relate that international relations with trade policy or exchange rate, it goes beyond that. Therefore, when we maintain such international relations with other countries, the origin of this idea lies in this treaties of Westphalia. This was signed in 1648, uh, which was that treaties of Westphalia, which was signed in 1648, that was the outcome of the 30 years war in Europe. Now, when countries that were involved in the war decided that war is disturbing, and then there are a lot of distortions that we have to face when the war takes place. It is not only disturbing for the people and their life, but also there is a loss of productivity and loss of the energy that we have. So there are a lot of tangible as well as intangible effects the war results in, so that with the end of that 30 years war, this treaties of Westphalia, it was signed by the European communities. Now, according to the very core part of this foreign Westphalia system, it states that with this system, which is the system of states or international society, that is comprising the sovereign state entities. So such community, such international society will comprise of the sovereign state entities. So there are nation states, those who will represent their domestic community with sovereignty, and they will also possess the monopoly of force within their mutually recognized territories, right? Which means that this treaty has offered the territories to the nations. It has admitted that once your territories are determined, no other country has right, or no other country should be invading you, or the cross boundary kind of conflict should not occur, because you are a sovereign state. And with mutual consent, then you can have interactions, you can have the transactions, exchange, and so on. But as far as that particular territory is concerned, you possess the monopoly, right? So monopolization of territories by establishing an international community and giving that power to the nation state to run that community was the core of such foreign Westphalia system. So this system has basically accepted that there are two principles of the state, of the nation states that we are going to have, and in other words, the geographical territories which identify themselves as state. So these two principles are: first, the sovereignty; second is the statehood. Now, what are these concepts stand for? So sovereignty, it means the decision making power. So you decide how much you're going to exchange with other countries, and you have the authority to protect the territory by creating the defense mechanism. If at all any foreign invasion happens, then you should have the right to protect your territory, and it is your responsibility to protect the territory. Other one is statehood. So what is statehood? You being the state, you have to then run the domestic system from political point of view, from economic point of view, and so on. So statehood gives unlimited power to the state in order to regulate, monitor, supervise the society for domestic purpose, and for external purpose, when that power is exercised, that becomes the sovereignty. So these are two pillars of this treaty. Now, the states, again, as I said, this was originated in the land of Europe. So European communities, they came up with this um, foreign Westphalia system. Now, when the nation states were empowered to contract treaties with one another and with the foreign powers, it provided that the emperor and the empire suffered no prejudice, right? So you should not have any prejudice in mind when you are having the exchange with other countries. You can have you can have different type of contracts. You deal with the foreign powers, and you also can have certain types of transactions between each other, but that should happen without any prejudice in mind, so that you have a clear slate with you, and with that you have that fresh approach to deal with the countries. And that is how you can rejuvenate the relations, which are then called as the international relations at large. So then, in terms of this idea of state sovereignty, this foreign Westphalia system, it has originated all the principles and the structural pillars of this kind of concept, the statehood and the sovereignty. Now, what is statehood? What are the different ethical, moral aspects of statehood that we discussed in the last time? So accountability, transparency, responsibility, and what all things the state is supposed to do for the society. So dominant state versus a facilitator state, all of those points we discussed well. Now, here in today's class, we'll focus more on the sovereignty, and with respect to that, what are the ethical standards, international ethical standards for states to follow in order to have the social harmony and also international peace. Because again, as we know, towards the end of Second World War, all countries felt the need to establish international cooperation and also peace, because war is always it is always exploitative, it is always destructive. So such destruction, if it continues, it will affect everyone's life, and it will spoil the future too. So that having international peace, cooperation, all of these things are necessary. So then, um, many a times it has happened that the world leaders, they realize something, then they establish a community, and then they talk about the ethical standards, moral standards, and so on. But still, at places the wars are going on, fine. So it's not that there is complete harmony that we are expecting, but because of the political priorities, because of the socio-economic factors, sometimes because of religion, it happens so, and so much so, that there are wars taking place, or maybe the conflict. And once that conflicts enters the social life of people, it destructs. So such destructive action, which is in other words the war, it hampers everything. So then, in that context, what kind of principles, what kind of international ethics we can look at, and how do we align that with the state sovereignty? That is that point we are trying to understand today. So the genesis of this particular thing, that is state sovereignty, it lies in the concept of treaties of Westphalia. And when it was practiced, this Westphalia treaty was practiced, for a very long time. There was wars didn't really take place. But then again, it happened so that because of the socio-economic, cultural clashes, political clashes, again the war started. So World War I, World War II, so rest is the history. So now, looking at the very term sovereignty, and the sovereignty that state is able to enjoy as the outcome of that treaty, there were many thinkers, those who have written extensively on this point, that is, when the states are sovereign, how do they exercise their power? And because of state sovereignty, what are the different changes that we can expect in the society? So Kant, a very very famous thinker, he stated, Immanuel Kant, he stated that sovereignty is the key mechanism of political reform, right? So he associated that concept of sovereignty with political reform, and he called sovereignty a mechanism. So for him, it is a mechanism with which political reforms can take place. But this sovereignty is not about how your domestic polity goes on, it is about the international polity. So when nation states are sovereign, that is how, by exercising such sovereignty, political reforms take place. And that, therefore, it is always a positive notion. See, reform is a word that always has the positive shade of meaning, because otherwise the very common term that we use is change, right? And change happens everywhere. Some changes are good, some changes are bad. But then, when we specifically use the term reform, it has the positive shade of meaning. So for him, when he looked at sovereignty as a key for the political reforms, he meant to say that there are positive political changes which result from this kind, which will result from the sovereignty that the state has. So it's a key mechanism for such reforms. Also, it is the way in which politics can be domesticated to approximate the formal principles of morality. Now, obviously, since Kant belonged to the space of ethics, which is an important branch in philosophy, he always connected the the subject matter of ethics to politics, to economics, to other social sciences. That is why, to connect this state sovereignty with the principles of morality, principles of ethics, he stated that sovereignty provides you the way in which politics can be domesticated, and it will also help you approximate the formal principles of morality. Now, whose morality is in question? Whose morality we are talking about? It is basically the morality of the state, right? So then, we are thinking about the moral ethical standards at a different level altogether. This is not the individual morality that is in question right now, it is the morality and ethics of the state, because a state is able to enjoy sovereignty. State is supposed to explore the options in order to implement statehood, also the sovereignty. So then, this is approximating the formal principles of morality for the state, and this way the politics can be domesticated. So that is how Kant has given his own approach towards sovereignty. Therefore, in the domain of philosophy, Many thinkers like Immanuel Kant have talked about the state sovereignty in relation with the moral ethical norms that we are expecting from the state. See, the Plato, if you have heard of Plato, Plato has given the concept of philosopher king. Fine. So all the I would say the ancestors in philosophy, they have always dealt with the issue of polity and what kind of political governance should take place. So even Socrates, then Plato, Aristotle, Immanuel Kant, all of them have dealt with this particular issue. And this idea of philosopher king is really very famous in the literature of political science and also in philosophy. So we are expecting a moral behavior, we are expecting moral principles to be exercised by the state. So they should not enjoy the power for their own interests, but rather they should use their power for the benefit of the society. So in the previous class, when I mentioned the term utilitarian principle, it J.S. Mill had said the same thing. There should be maximum number of good for the maximum number of people, to make people better off or to leave people in a better off situation. Now that way, the morality of the state, the morality of these stakeholders will become visible. So that is how Kant associated morality and the domestication of the politics, by applying the idea, by applying the concept of sovereignty. So that was Immanuel Kant. But then it is uh, the foundation for some of the basic questions, because individually, when you're looking at individuals behavior, it is easier to talk about the moral principles of individuals, the human virtues and so on, the value system, etc. And we are also familiar with that kind of discussion, like how individuals should behave morally. But when it comes to the state morality and the other principles, the values for the state, there are a lot of conflicting questions here. There are a lot of things which are overlapping, and therefore these are tough questions to answer. So here, when the state is supposed to be, or say rather state is expected to behave in this manner, there are questions related to morality and justice, because sometimes what is just may not be moral, and something that is moral may not be just, because it is context specific, it differs from case to case. So there is a relativity involved in that. In absolute sense, it is difficult to talk about what is ethical for the state, what is moral for the state. Therefore the questions of morality and justice are difficult to answer, because we always expect the state to give us justice. And obviously people have this expectation that if there is some injustice happening, then the state should look after, and the state should ensure that the justice should be given to the people. But in some cases, though state tries to be unbiased, tries to be impartial, but still in some or the other way it happens so that some people feel that this is injustice, some people feel that state is behaving in the most immoral way, because the conflicts happen. And if you can't please everyone when you're trying to be just and when you're trying to be moral, that is why these questions are tough, and there sometimes there's a tough situation for the state to deal with that. Right? So does it mean the absolute concentration of power should happen? Because once the state is given sovereignty, the statehood, and the decision making power, it is quite possible that there is absolute concentration of power. Many of you must have heard that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now it means that since the state has to be a facilitator, where the state has to be a regulator, and it also has sovereignty, decision making authority, then sometimes when people are in dilemma, when people are people in the state fail to understand how to deal with the situation, they try to make use of their power. Fine. And therefore the concentration keeps going on, and such absolute concentration of power hampers the social interest, and instead of solving people's issues, the situation worsens. That is why absolute concentration of power is never ever justifiable. It cannot be justified, because such concentration of power fails to ensure the ethical moral behavior of the state. That is why instead of concentration of power, what is better is to have decentralization of power at different levels. So each member, each stakeholder in that structure, and also the organizational structure, will be able to understand how do I perform my duties so that the system will run smoothly. So absolute concentration of power is never the answer when there are questions about morality, justice, and so on. So as we ask the question that is about individual freedom and autonomy, similarly there are questions about state autonomy and the freedom that state is able to enjoy. So here I'm reminded of Adam Smith, who talked about self interest. Now, the British legacy, the British tradition of philosophy has never favored selfish behavior of individuals, but they have said that individuals have right and freedom to pursue their self interest, right? So individuals should have freedom, they should have liberty to decide what they want to do for their pursuits, and they should be autonomous to take decisions on their own. Now, ideally, it is easier to talk about such individual freedom, but then sometimes it happens that when individuals enjoy the liberty and they pursue their interest, self interest, that is the way they create a conflict, or there are some frictions with other individuals. Fine. So if I am only using the social facility, for example, I have a public park nearby and then I use it daily. Now, in that context, if I am occupying the space majority of the times because I am a part of this society, I have freedom to use that. I'm autonomous enough to decide at what time I'm going to use the facility. When I think of myself, it may create a clash with the other individual. Now, such moral questions, when they are applicable to individual life in the society, similarly, such questions are also applicable when the state is functioning, when the state sovereignty and statehood is in question. So, both ways, striking a balance between the sovereignty, statehood, and its freedom, it has to occur. Obviously, it is going to be a very tough task. So, then looking at again the evolution of literature in this space, here I must mention John Rawls. Who has talked about the laws of justice, and he helped us realize that of course when individuals are able to enjoy their freedom and they exercise different fundamental rights given to them, it cannot ensure the balance. Fine. So some individuals will be able to get such access, some people are denied the access, which is injustice. Now the state has to step in to ensure the justice, but for state also there can be different questions to deal with. So the law of justice should be stated in such a way that it will become utilitarian. So when state is ensuring justice, it has to apply the concept of utilitarianism, that if at all you take an action or if you take a step, it should ensure that there is maximum number of good or maximum positive change for maximum number of people. That is how we can ensure justice, that is how the state's behavior becomes justifiable. So in this particular context, the contribution by Immanuel Kant and John Rawls is important to understand how the state sovereignty can be defined. How do we structure the very concept of state sovereignty, and what are the different implications when the state behaves in a particular manner? So, this is the sovereignty and the connection of this concept with philosophy, because philosophy being a very fundamental stream of knowledge, it offers us various inputs, various insights to apply in other domains of knowledge like political science, economics, sociology, and so on. So this is the connection between sovereignty and philosophy. Now going ahead, if I just continue how there are different terms related to this, as I said, uh, there is a lot of relativity and also individual behavior that is connected with this particular point. People also discuss like whether the state should have absolute sovereignty or relative sovereignty. Now, what are these concepts and how they emerge? The point here is, when sovereignty is looked at in its pure essence, it ensures that the state should have absolute power for decision making, and no foreign entity should dominate the state's decision, right? So this is absolute sovereignty, which is very important if you want to exist, if you want to survive as an independent nation. The moment your sovereignty is threatened, and therefore you're not able to protect your territory, then of course the foreign or maybe the external factors, they get more space to intervene your decision making process. And the major threat is the threat of survival, it is the matter of your existence altogether. Therefore, if the sovereignty is relative, then it can't be guaranteed. But if it is absolute sovereignty that the states are able to ensure, then you are able to protect yourself from any external invasion or maybe territorial security that takes place. So, absolute versus relative sovereignty, most of the experts have argued in favor of the absolute sovereignty that is needed for the territories to exist as an independent nation. So, absolute sovereignty is needed. Uh, so, therefore, the independent states, the independent territories will be able to identify themselves as a country, as a nation, and of course, therefore, at domestic as well as at international level, their identity will continue, right? But now there are some questions and also some issues when it comes to the independent identity of nations with respect to their sovereignty. Therefore, now in this context, when you look at the domestic policies and domestic decisions, the nation states continue to have their power. So the strength of nation state continues to be there for the local affairs, the domestic issues. But in today's context, if you observe closely how states behave, how states are interacting, exchanging with other countries, you will find that in terms of the international context, there is no absolute sovereignty that the nation states have. Rather, they are subject to the dominance of the international organizations and the foreign or external factors, which are sometimes non-political, non-economic too. Let me give you some examples. So basically, I'm answering the question here that in the international context, whether nation states are having the absolute sovereignty or not. And in this connection, I am trying to see how the sovereignty as a concept, that is from conceptual point of view and from practical point of view, if it exists or if there are some threats to that, right? So whether it is a nation or a global community that will survive in future. So in this connection, if I give you certain examples like Russia Ukraine geopolitical crisis. Now, you know, honestly speaking, this is the world geography. If you look at, um, all countries are not really lucky enough to have all the resources with them, right? So some countries lack certain resources, some countries are not as progressive and as other countries, and because of that, the weaker states, they are not able to sort of deal with all their problems, and then the powerful countries get a chance to then intervene, fine. So there was a very straightforward issue, that is whether Ukraine wanted to join NATO or not, right? Now, since Ukraine has independent identity and the nation state of Ukraine has its independence, they have statehood and sovereignty, that was their individual decision, right? But then, since Russia did not want Ukraine to join the organization, the geopolitical crisis emerged. Fine, which means that at international level, when it comes to the international politics and the international relations, you can't only think about your domestic concerns, priorities, and so on. There is a monopolization of international politics, right? And some countries truly enjoy the hegemonic power, like USA. So therefore, if you then look at the ideological categorization, the divide between the capitalist mindset and the socialist, or the so-called leftist mindset, it still exists. And based on the ideological foundation, countries do practice and they do exercise their hegemonic power. So the polarization in terms of ideology, in terms of economic power, concentration of wealth, that polarization is very well visible. That is the reason why when Ukraine, a smaller country as compared to Russia, when the country wanted to join, Russia felt that it is the dominance of Europe, and European countries are willing, they want Ukraine to join this organization. Russia didn't want, and then the geopolitical crisis started. Now, again, it is up to the individuals, that is whose side they want to stand in. But that is individual standpoint. But from politics point of view, if we at all believe in the sovereignty of even the smaller nations, they should be able to decide what they want to do. And no other power should be able to make interventions. So, this is about an international example of a geopolitical crisis which has consequences in terms of changes in the currency exchange rate, so that the international trade has disturbed a lot. And when this economic superpower like USA is imposing restrictions on countries for international transactions, foreign currencies, and so on, it is going to have a wider impact, right? So in this context, are we able to enjoy absolute sovereignty? That is a basic question. And secondly, if it is not, then whose dominance is this? Whether nation states continue to have their states, or it is the global community or the external factors which are trying to dominate you. So such dominance of the powerful states, powerful in terms of their defense power or maybe economic power, they try to dominate others. And this is like, you don't have to then you don't have to acquire land in order to dominate the country. That is a very old trend where countries used to fight for the land. Nowadays, land is no more a tool or a weapon to establish your power, but instead of land, economy has become a tool through which you can establish your power. So now this means that again, somewhere the imperial tendency, the imperial mindset is again coming to the forefront, where the powerful countries are trying to dominate the smaller countries in the name of becoming a global community. So it is really, fascinating to talk about, being a global community, globalization, and the entire world is a kind of global village. These are all very fascinating kind of concepts, and it is too ideal to talk about it. But in practice, there are a lot of issues that nation states are facing when it comes to the international politics, the dominance of the powerful countries, and they're not able to face them. They're not able to stand against them. So that again, the polarization has taken place, and it is in terms of the economic strength the countries have. So, economically mightier countries, they enjoy such hegemony, whereas the countries that are weaker, they're not able to continue to have strength, and therefore their sovereignty is in question. So these are some relevant examples that will help you understand the context here and some of the fundamental questions related to the sovereignty of the states. Fine. So then it comes to the ethical part, like when the powerful countries try to dominate others, whether it's ethical or not, right? So a person like me who has the mindset of philosophy will definitely ask a question whether it's ethical to dominate others, right? So once I am in a position and I am able to sort of run my country smoothly, uh, is it the case that I am getting that power and right to disturb other countries? Definitely not, right? So according to the ethical standards, instead of war, instead of conflict, there should be cooperation. So countries should cooperate with each other in such a way that what is lacking in other country, I should be able to provide that, and something that I am not going to have, the other country should help me out. So that is how the international cooperation is the basic principle to have a smooth international or global community. And that way, the sovereignty can be ensured. So when you cooperate, you respect the sovereignty of other countries. But instead, when you're trying to invade others, you are then threatening them, and such threatening cannot ensure the sovereignty in the long term. Therefore, ethics will say moral, according to the moral principles, there should be mutual cooperation, irrespective of your ideology, irrespective of your geographical area, the religion that you follow, your linguistic and otherwise other aspirations. Irrespective of that, all countries should be respecting each other's sovereignty, because once sovereignty is respected, it ensures the protection of your territory. And once territory is lost, everything is lost, because if you don't have your own land, then you lose your identity. And if any other nation state or any other country is responsible for that, then it is not ethical at all, then it is not justifiable at all. So what has happened in case of Syrian people or the Rohingya Muslims? They don't have their land, and since they don't have their land, the sovereignty, etc., this is just a castle in the air for them. So there's no point in talking about sovereignty in case of such communities which do not have their land. That is why respecting each other's sovereignty and respecting the identity of other people belonging to other community is most moral, most ethical. But again, in the world, if you look at the world canvas, the bigger picture, you will find that it does not really happen. At various places, in various cases, we have seen that the sovereignty gets threatened, and that is how it may not be the direct imperialism, but indirectly quasi imperial principles are threatening, and they are causing problems to the sovereignty of the countries. And if this happens, I mean, if one country is trying to threaten the other country with the help of its defense mechanism, powerful military, and so on, somewhere it is also a question of the human rights of the people. Fine. So when you are threatening the sovereignty, the human rights of the other community, they are in question. People are not able to have dignity with life, because the core principle of all human rights is to make people eligible to have the life with dignity. But again, once the territories are not protected and there is a threat to that, then human rights, etc., all these are pointless to talk about, because your own existence is under threat. So that how do we ensure the human rights to people? And therefore, protecting nations from territory point of view, from the point of view of their of their productivity, also their political rights, economic rights, and so on, has become a real question in this context. And it's not the case that currently we have such examples where the sovereignty is threatened. The world history is full of such incidences. So then when other governance systems used to be there, like monarchy, kingship, etc., etc., at that time also such conflicts used to happen. So that is why Marx had said that the world history is the history of haves and have nots, irrespective of any kind of governance system that existed. So it is a constant struggle, it's a constant tussle between the people, those who are powerful, and the people, those who don't have the power. So that is how the conflicts are continuously taking place, and that is how the human civilization has faced a lot of issues with respect to the international relations, ethical standards, moral behavior, and so on. So therefore, in its ideal form, once a nation state identifies itself with the land, that is the territory, its population, its culture, language, and so on, that should be respected by the international community for any purpose. It can be your political hegemony, it can be your strong economy. In the name of all such factors, at no point you can invade others, at no point you can exercise your hegemonic power for others. Now, in this context, I must also talk about a concept of deep state, right? And this has so much of relevance in terms of India at the current juncture. Now, talking about India, I really feel proud in saying that we are a transformative economy. Fine. So India is really having a great leap in terms of how the economy functions, and therefore, with such big market, with such aspirational population, and the emerging middle class, we are really doing well as compared to even the advanced countries in the world. So that looking at the economic progress that India is making, there are a lot of foreign powers which are not really happy and satisfied, and they are kind of envious, right? So then the kind of deep state that is working in advanced countries like USA, they are trying to dominate us, they are trying to disturb the kind of progress we are making. So currently, I mean, maybe just a weeks ago, 1 or 2 weeks ago, there was a international discussion related to whether the Adani company and the proprietors of Adani should be imprisoned just because of there are some claims against them. Now, it was never the international judicial system or international court that was involved in this kind of discussion, and there was no international, sort of a documentation like whether that case should be really filed or that should really be practiced. But maybe the deep state actors in USA, they were really causing this debate to happen, so they were instrumental in that. Now, why that it has happened? Because Adani right now is investing heavily in the green energy projects, and once India establishes its monopoly power, or maybe it is expanding its business in foreign territories, that may be a threat for the future of US economy, because they don't really want to uh, they don't want Adani to sort of get maximum business in green energy. And that is the reason why the deep state actors in USA, they are trying to sort of discourage the progress that the company is making. And there are some some personalities like George Soros, etc., they keep talking against India, and then they don't really want our industries to make progress. So people call it deep state actors, and such deep states, they really internationally, they create the pressure lobbies, and they also create the atmosphere in a negative shade, so that people are discouraged. Same thing happened in case of SEBI just some months ago, that SEBI was accused of some false claims and some kind of favoritism to certain companies in the economy. And it was just because of the fact that these companies are making progress and expanding business beyond India. Fine. So that is why you must have heard of the Hindenburg report. According to the report, is trying to favor uh, SEBI is trying to favor some companies in India. Again, it's Adani, and that is influencing the domestic power. So once SEBI's procedure is questioned, then there will be the whole legal framework that will come into picture. Then Indian government will have to make intervention, and that is how the whole system gets discouraged. And the whole system is questioned by not only the domestic media but also the international media. And once media takes up the issue, we all are aware like the extent to which that issue will go. And then there is character assassination also that happens when the issue becomes public. Now, what I am trying to say here is, when nation states deal with each other and they are not following the principles, the moral principles here, there are many deep state actors, non state actors, which get a space to sort of make intervention. And this is never the mutual cooperation that countries have, but rather they are trying to discourage each other, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly. And when it comes to protecting nations, we do have organizations like UN, and they are supposed to protect the human rights. They are supposed to talk in favor of the countries which are affected by such immoral behavior of the deep state. But then UN sometimes, I mean, this may be a very um, bold statement that I am making here, but in order to ensure international ethics and properly planned practices of nations, UN has to play an instrumental role. But unfortunately, UN here basically, again, it favors the powerful countries, and there is no say that the underdeveloped or less powerful countries can have. So that is how there is a skewed kind of a behavior, or maybe you can say the skewed atmosphere that is always favoring the powerful countries, though it is immoral. But the other countries, those who have less power, they don't have any say, they don't have equal representation, and that is the problem that most of the countries, emerging countries like India, are facing, because they are not as powerful as the advanced countries, where they are able to enjoy political hegemony and economic monopoly. Now, in this context, when we are struggling with the political hegemony and economic monopoly of these countries, countries like India are trying to find out their own space. So then, when it comes to global south versus global north, India is always looked at as a leader of the global south because of the transformative changes that are taking place in India. So it's a kind of phase of transition for countries like us, where we are expected to challenge such hegemony of advanced countries and the kind of economic power they have been enjoying for centuries together, which has really hampered the sovereignty indirectly, and directly their economic policies are getting affected. So from the point of view of international ethics, such deep state actors and the entities and also the organizations which are trying to discourage the progress that is taking place in other countries, that should be controlled, regulated, and if needed they should be penalized. uh, then and only then we can have healthy atmosphere and mutual cooperation amongst the countries. So that is expected from the point of view of the international ethics. Now, in order to look at the contemporary policies with respect to international ethics, there are some I can say the ideological principles which have a great impact, right? So all of us must have, all of us are aware that the principles of globalization, neoliberalization are around us, and we are a part of that entire exercise. Now, in the context of countries like India, which are said to be the emerging market economies and the global south, we took part in that globalization process a little late, but there were advanced countries which really implemented and executed the agenda of neoliberal policies, and to some extent that neoliberal agenda, it was imposed on countries like India without examining our preparedness, without examining our capacity to accept and implement neoliberalization. So then the political principles, or the political, I can say political definition of globalization, and the economic impact of globalization are different in the context of advanced versus the underdeveloped countries. And then lot of ethical issues are also involved in this, which is really creating questions with respect to the freedom of nation state and its sovereignty. So how neoliberalization has its impact, and neoliberalization is an ideology that has promoted the principles of globalization, that is LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. So this kind of package to become global, that is offered by neoliberalization as an ideology, right? Now, if you disaggregate the word neoliberalism or neoliberalization, there are two different words in this. One is neo, second is liberalism. Now, the political science here, it defines liberalism as a thought process, which says that any kind of restriction on human behavior, or any kind of restriction in terms of the freedom of speech, freedom of this, that, etc., that is not really in favor of human freedom. So that there has to be a liberal approach towards everything. So when people have the right to speech, people have right to move from one place to another place, the state has to respect people's fundamental rights, and there should be liberal atmosphere. Now, in this case, when the individualism and therefore the individual centered economic structure is created, and we are just redefining the liberal political thought, that appears as neoliberalization or neoliberalism, where the regulation by the state, that declines slowly, and that is occupied by the individuals. Now, individuals from the domain of politics, the individuals from the domain of economy, and the individuals from the domain of, let's say, some overlapping areas like society, culture, and so on. Individuals get prominence rather than state. So, decline of state power and the emergence of individuals as an alternative power is at the core of neoliberal ideas. Now, when this happens, it implies that now state will shrink, and then state will be in the role of a spectator. So state will not have much role to play, and the decisions will be made by the individuals. Now, when this happens, we are then ready to apply privatization. So public sector will decline, private sector will be an important player. And with globalization, we integrate the economy, domestic economy, with the international, so that there is free flow of commodities, free flow of different type of goods, free flow of investment, capital, etc. Which means individual decision making is at the center when neoliberalization is adopted. And then it gives us the package of liberal policies, privatization, and globalization. Now, from the point of view of the international politics, and different policies related to economy and so on, this neoliberalization, it was superimposed, and it was insisted upon by the by not only the powerful countries in the world like UK, USA, European nations, but here the role of supranational agencies like World Bank, WTO, and so on, that was also clearly visible. So, in a way, these supranational agencies were catalysts, were instrumental in sort of insisting the countries like India to accept the globalization package. Now, unfortunately, in the context of country like India, though we did not accept globalization initially, but later we had to do that. It was because of the fact that we did not have our say, and we did not really have that much of economic power in terms of foreign currency or foreign exchange to deal with that situation. So, since India's share in world trade was the lowest, and we didn't really have an option but to buy from other countries things like petroleum and so on, we had a severe lack of access to such resources. So that it happened, so that we, since we are on the verge of bankruptcy, and we were on the verge of collapse from policy point of view, we had to get rescue from the supranational agencies. They came to rescue us, but that rescue operation, it came along with some conditions. So the help offered by the supranational agency like IMF, it was not free of cost. There was a shadow cost associated with that, and the shadow cost, it was the package of globalization. So IMF imposed on us that if you want us to lend you, if you want to borrow from us, you have to then accept the principles of globalization. So you make your policies more liberal so that foreign entities can enter Indian market. You make the sectors private. So in almost all sectors now privatization is visible, and then you become a part of global community, so that the goods from Indian market will go to foreign countries, and the foreign commodities will enter Indian market. Now, here, with this kind of approach, the intervention of the supranational agencies like IMF, it was clearly very visible. Unfortunately, India did not really get the benefits of such globalization package, except few good changes like technology. Fine. So, what is the outcome? What is or maybe if I have to critically evaluate the kind of political transformation and economic change during that time, I would say that it's only the technology that has created disruptions, good changes rather. But apart from that, it did not really help in ensuring the welfare of the people. So the masses did not really benefit from this kind of globalization package, but rather the divide between the elite, economic elites in the society, and the marginalized masses, that divide has increased a lot. So it is because of the imposition of reforms policy by an agency like IMF, which India was not ready for. But unfortunately, because of the 1991 crisis, we had to accept it. And as a result, now we are facing issues like increasing income inequality, wealth inequality, therefore, the huge gap between the elites and the masses. So that is how the contemporary policies in countries like India are dominated by the principles of neoliberalization, globalization, the impact of supranational agencies, and so on. Although the idea of neoliberalism originated in advanced countries, but then people from those countries only have started criticizing that. So if at all you have heard of Joseph Stiglitz, who is a Nobel laureate in economics, he himself was working with IMF, then World Bank, and he was a part of Clinton administration. He himself has written a book titled as Discontents of Globalization, because he was not able to see human face of globalization policy, and he felt that with such kind of a policy, we are rather uh, making the less powerful countries or underdeveloped countries worse off. Fine. So it is not only about the inequality at the local level, at the national level, but international inequality is also rising because of this. So is it ethical, is it moral to behave in this way? So the morality of international community was questioned at large when this kind of neoliberal policy became a part of international politics and also the international economic affairs. So global order, when it was changing and it was in favor of the advanced countries, it was a matter of their ethical standard and the kind of value system that was that was descended by the neoliberal policy and the economic reforms. I really question myself whether we can call it as economic reform, because as I said, reform has a very positive shade of meaning. But with such changes in the economy, are we really benefited? If the answer is no, then can we call it a reform policy, right? So these are some critical questions that one may come across when the international political and economic issues are dealt with. So since globalization was looking at the binaries, that is international versus domestic policy, international versus domestic economy, there were some aspects related to that, like international trade, then the factor mobility like capital transfers or the labor migration. See, with respect to neoliberal policy, the brain drain has occurred increasingly when such changes were taking place. So the IT sector boom in India, I may be going a little off track, but then I must mention this point, that neoliberalization and globalization policy has not only affected the economy in terms of the free flow of goods and services, but it has also resulted in international migration to a very great extent, because then there was a red carpet for foreigners to enter India and Indian people in abroad, so that the migration of uh, you know bright minds, people, those who are those who are highly talented and multi skilled, and the polymaths basically, when they transfer to other countries permanently, we had to face brain drain, right? So from India the talent was outgoing, and because of such mobility of human power, the human resource, we are at loss. Fine. Capital transfers, investment flows, up till this it's fine. I mean, as long as we have the capital coming in and we are strengthening the industry, it's fine. But the moment it becomes the transfer of human power and the multi talented workforce, that is something that we can't afford. But unfortunately the international policies were in favor of such human power, also the migration of human power. And that is how everything got affected, like international finance got affected, the currency mechanism got affected, and to a very great extent the terror funding also happened in this whole process. Because if there is deregulation at large, and then it's only the global community that is ensuring such exchange, and nation states do not have any say, somewhere the antisocial tendencies will come to the forefront. So within that time period terror funding also happened, and USA was the victim of that. So when there was a collapse of the two buildings of that World Trade Center, I know that is when USA realized that we have created a monster. We have created the monster of terrorism, and now we have to face the consequences. So that is how this, after realization that, this was a mistake, when we imposed globalization policies on other countries, now we are going to suffer as a result of that. So such global divide, where a group of countries is able to dominate others, they have the hegemony power to dictate others. It it, it is not going to be beneficial all the time. At some point you will be at disadvantage, you will be at loss. So now people from the advanced countries, those who are questioning the morality of international community, like Joseph Stiglitz basically is a very good public speaker, and he is a very prolific writer also. So he has written extensively on the on the consequences of globalization. And his clear statement is, this principle, the globalization, in the form of an idea, it does not have human face, right? So it is only to maintain the interest of the powerful countries, the countries which have economic monopoly. Otherwise this globalization policy has nothing to do with the masses, and also the third world countries, if I may say so. So they do not have any say, they don't have representation when such political norms are applied. So therefore questioning the ethics of these powerful countries is done by their own people. Fine. So the discontents of globalization, or the lack of human face to globalization policy, is, it has brought to the forefront by their own people only. So leave about how India or Indian people can criticize globalization policy. Their own people are not now and have become anti-global. So I mean, the way in which this global order was created, with the influence of globalization, now people talk about deglobalization, where the mightier administrations, like Trump has already announced that if there is a threat to dollar and its monopoly in international transactions, USA is going to impose economic restrictions on all the countries which are trying to promote their local currency. Fine. And he always had that trade war with China. So this is a tussle. Fine. So countries which try to get economic power, they are bound to face this kind of a tussle. So the rivalry between China and USA is, I mean, it's very famous. So again, people are familiar with how Chinese economic power is trying to challenge USA from currency point of view, from the point of view of foreign trade. But then ultimately here, um, the one who is winning this kind of tussle will again create that kind of hegemony, the kind of territory at global level. But then whether it's ethical, the question comes back, whether it is ethical to then dominate others, to dictate others, like how you are going to run your policies. So it's not the victory in terms of land, it is not the acquisition of land to establish your power, it is taking place in indirect manner. So once your economy is dominated, it's done. You don't have to you don't have to become imperial in that case. Once your economy is under control, the nation state loses its identity. And that is the reason why, when we talk about make in India and so on, that is an effort to continue our existence, that is an effort to ensure that we will have our own identity, and we won't be under the dominance of any economically powerful country. So to continue our existence on world map, and to have the strength to question the morality, the sovereignty, and also the ethics of the global community. We need to sort of uh, acquire that kind of a strength first, then only will become the leader of the global south. So in the context of countries which are advanced, which are less advanced, having such gap in place, one can then think about this point from ethics and morality point of view, where people are not practicing the values. So rather, some countries do not have any value system. They always are into the business of discouraging others, or having some dirty politics to discourage their system. So this kind of practices should not be continued, and therefore the moral principle should be exercised when it comes to the sovereignty issue. So um, in this context, I would now like to make some final statements, and to conclude what we have discussed today. There are certain things, certain issues that one must be able to relate with the domestic as well as international context. That is, in recent times, there were threats created by the countries with respect to the freedom, the independence, and sovereignty of other countries. Now this should be completely discouraged, because if the other state or other country fails to do that, then we do have a strong global community which should ensure that no such threats can be there. Fine. So it is the responsibility of the global community. It can be represented by UN or maybe other supranational agencies, but they have to ensure that the sovereignty and independence of every country is respected, and no such threats are existing. That needs to be ensured. That is one point. Secondly, if there are or if there are practices that are uh, against morality, or it's not ethically justifiable, then that should be discouraged, and it should be subject to some kind of a punishment, some penalty, so that the lesson goes. Fine. So that other countries will not engage in that kind of immoral or unethical practices. But that needs to be there in order to ensure the sovereignty of all the countries. So any kind of political aggression, any kind of invasions should not be allowed. And if at all it happens either in direct or indirect manner, there should be a mechanism to sort of discourage that. Fine. So again, with respect to the geopolitical crisis between Russia and Ukraine, the global community, to a very great extent, they failed to address that issue. It was because of the power Russia has. Fine. Now, in case of Israel Palestine, also, things are not really, no, I mean, the situation is not really better. So, then what the global community is doing in that context? So, how countries represent themselves, and do they really honor the human values? Do they really honor the human rights? And then, how whether they are moral, or whether they are applying the principles of ethics and morality, these are the basic questions. So political aggression and invasion should not be allowed, so that the politico religious causes here should not be entertained, right? So no country should be able to play its religious card in order to sort of get engaged with this kind of destructive activity. Rather, politico religious causes which are responsible for crisis or war, that should not be entertained by the global community. They should not be entertained, and people should not engage themselves in that kind of action, because ultimately there is a ultimately it is destructive, and people lose their confidence and their charm in life. So that nobody should play religion card, nobody should be involved in this kind of aggression. That is most ethical. And then, of course, the geopolitical positioning of countries is different, but just because you enjoy certain features by or maybe by nature you are positioned in a particular place, that does not mean that you get the absolute power to threaten others. So geopolitical positioning should not be used as a tool. Fine. Because that is nature gifted, so you cannot make use of that just to maintain your economic power. So that is, I mean, that is again unethical. So with the changing dynamics at the world level and the changes in the global or world order, there should be for a better cause, that should be for the humanity, right? So anything that favors humanity should be entertained, but anything that goes against the principles of humanity, that should not be entertained, both by the domestic order, domestic setup, as well as the international community. So in order to respect the political sovereignty of the country, all the destructive forces like deep state and so on, or non-state actors, all such destructive forces should be suppressed, and the positive forces should be encouraged in such a way that we will be able to maintain a balanced world order. Then we ensure human values, then we ensure and respect sovereignty of all countries, and then we will really have the international peace, cooperation, and so on. Okay, so that was the final point that I wanted to make here. Now, when I was studying this particular topic, I came across two different videos, maybe in the form of a documentary, but one is based on the Russia Ukraine crisis. So it depicts how the aggression has taken place and the viewpoints of Russian administration versus Ukraine, what are their viewpoints, and how they have dealt with the geopolitical conflict when it occurred. And the other one is based on Israel Palestine, which are the widely discussed topics with respect to the political international sovereignty and the statehood, the independence that countries are able to enjoy. So these links I will also post in the chat box. So whenever you have time, you can just watch it. Because now if I start screening, it will take a lot of time. So I just suggest all of you to watch it later. Okay, so this is what I wanted to discuss in today's class. So I hope I was able to deal with this topic mm in a better way, and I was also able to cover, though it's a very 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 vast topic, but at least the gist of the principles like sovereignty, ethics, etc., at least the gist I was able to present for you. Okay, so this is what I wanted to talk about. So now we can have the questions.
Yes. Any questions?
I'll also send my PPT, so those who want to read that again will have access to it.
So, thank you so much for the presentation, madam. So, the question is, when you look at India's current situation, and we've always had a third way, kind of a middle approach, and then you've got various different countries who have their own vested interest as well. I mean, you talked about, I think from what I understood, uh, your narrative was probably not positive about globalization. Would I say that's correct?
um See, first, let me put a disclaimer here that when academic people talk about any issue, it cannot be called as a narrative, right? Narrative is the task that people from politics will undertake. Academic people like me don't believe in creating a narrative. That is one thing. Secondly, to answer your question about globalization, since I belong to the land which is still in the developing phase, I would always favor the betterment for my fellow people, right? So I would always think about the tribal communities in India, which are I mean, which are highly disadvantaged with such kind of a policy. I would always talk about the rural urban divide in the context of India, which is a cause of worry for rural people as well as urban people, because globalization has redefined the economic growth, right? So as long as most of the people are able to migrate to cities, they become the part of urban migrant population. And then the industries grow, the services sector takes the momentum. That is how the growth is defined. Now this new definition of growth is not sustainable. We neglect agriculture increasingly, and such neglect of agriculture has resulted in the dispossession of the resources, displacement of people, maybe within the country and outside the country too. And that is how, uh, by and large, when you're just looking at the changing landscape of economic growth post globalization, you will find that the weaker sections in the society have become the victims of this policy overall. I also mentioned that there are some good things that have happened. Like, we now have the advanced technology in all sectors, in finance, in trade, and also in banking sector, etc. So technology, really, I mean, one has to admit that it's a positive change. But otherwise, if you closely look at the impact of such globalization policy, are we benefited at large or are we disadvantaged at large? So, from the point of view of the income divide in the country, globalization has widened the gap. So it's not the balanced way and sustainable way of growth. This is highly unbalanced, skewed kind of a growth, which is benefiting the, um, I would say, uh, the pockets of country which are industrially concentrated and which are the hubs of the services sector like IT. Beyond that, globalization has not really helped much in creating a balanced, or the growing society, but it is a balanced growth that we can expect. Therefore, the forces of globalization have rather resulted in the decline of the economic power that the state used to have. And that is how somewhere, we accept the foreign elements in our investments in the market in terms of trade and so on. Now when this dominance increases, we lose our own identity. Therefore, looking at the long term effects of globalization, uh, I mean, if the trend continues, that is deglobalization, that will really be beneficial for countries where the income divide is too large. That is my submission.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah.